delay. We have been studying the life of the kings, and last time we had studied the life of King Hezekiah. Again, as usual, if I can request people to put on their videos, as many as possible, that would be great. Last time we studied about how King Hezekiah kept the Passover. At the start of his reign, the first New Year's Day itself, he opened the temple. He opened the temple, and then he celebrated the Passover. And in the Passover, he even got northern people of Israel to come and participate. And he reinstated the temple services and the tithes for the Levites and the priests. And so he sought to honor God in everything, and God blessed him. Now, after 3 years, that is during Hezekiah's fourth reign to sixth, during his fourth year to sixth year, Samaria fell and the northerners went into captivity. Now, the Bible says that the Assyrian emperor who attacked Samaria and took those people captive, his name was Shalmaneser V. And in the records of the land of Assyria, inscriptions have been found, and they also attributed to Shalmaneser. But then there is also this later person, the king after Shalmaneser, whose name was Sargon II. And Sargon also claims that, I have captured Samaria. So most historians try to reconcile the so-called contradiction in this way, that perhaps around the time that Samaria died, Samaria fell, around that time, Shalmaneser must have died, and Sargon II took over as the emperor of Assyria. So he was not a son, he was an usurper. Okay. Now, let us look at Hezekiah's early actions, some of the things that he did. Shall we read 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 7? I'll ask Ashish to read today. We'll begin by reading 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 7.
The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him, and he prospered wherever he went. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him.
Yeah, as we had studied in the earlier sessions, Ahaz, who was Hezekiah's father, he was a wicked king, but he was very loyal to the Assyrians. So here we find that Hezekiah stopped paying the tribute. Every year, according to the policy that Ahaz had agreed to, the people of Judah were giving a heavy tribute to the Assyrians, and Hezekiah stopped this policy. We don't know when he stopped it, but he must have a convenient time to stop it. Would have been after Shalmaneser died, that is after Samaria fell. Yeah, let's read verse 8, same chapter, verse 8.
He subdued the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city.
Yeah. During Ahaz's reign, the Philistines had invaded Judah. And this is probably one of the motivation that Hezekiah had. They invaded us, so we will attack them. From the Bible, we know that the Philistines consisted of 5 city-states. And some of these states were loyal to the Assyrians, some of them were not loyal. So since Hezekiah was against the Assyrians, he would also have an incentive to attack those Philistine states which were loyal. So that's what he did. He attacked them. In the meantime, there was no problem in Judah because Sargon was busy in his own empire, in his heartland, in his Assyrian heartland, because after the death of Shalmaneser, there were rebellions here and there, different parts of the empire. So Sargon was busy, occupied with all those things. And I'll just show a picture. Let's see if I can share the screen from here. Yeah, this is some of the early actions that Hezekiah did. Some remains of that have been found. So this is a four-horned altar from Bathsheba. It's evidently a pagan altar, but it was from Beersheba, which is one of the towns in Judah, and it was broken down. So archaeologists think that this was part of the reforms and the cleansing that Hezekiah did of the land. And then here is another altar from Lachish, again, one of the cities of Judah. And here we find that the horns of the altar are broken. It looks like the horns were deliberately broken. And that again seems to be an action on the part of Hezekiah and the people with him. They were cleansing the land of the pagan altars. This is a toilet that was found in a shrine at Lachish. So in Lachish, there was a shrine dedicated to a pagan deity, Baal or one of those deities, and a toilet was found kept there. And it seems as if this was part of Hezekiah's desecration of all the idolatry that was there in the land. So this is like the background actually to today's studies. In the last two sessions, we studied about how Hezekiah had cleansed the land of all these idols. And in this left picture, the person standing on the right is Sargon. That is, he is the emperor of Assyria who took over after Shalmaneser died. That is around the time that Samaria fell. And then to the left of Sargon here, to the left of Sargon in this picture here is his son, and his son's name was Sennacherib. And Sennacherib was assisting Sargon in the rule of the kingdom of Assyria. And on the right is a picture of Sennacherib, or a drawing or a sculpture of Sennacherib taken a little later when Sennacherib became the king. So Sargon died, he died in battle, and Sennacherib succeeded him as the king of Assyria. Sennacherib himself had a lot of house cleaning to do. There were a lot of rebellions in the Assyrian heartland, Babylon, all that area. But after Sennacherib stabilized that part of the kingdom, he turned his attention westward. So now let's read 2 Chronicles chapter 32, and let's read verse 1. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 1.
After these deeds of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered Judah. He encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them over to himself.
Yeah. So after these things, it reminds us of all the temple work, the Passover, and all the good things that Hezekiah had done. And it's a principle in scripture that those who do godly things should not expect to live happily ever after. Just because you did something good or you honored God, it doesn't mean that life is going to be all comfortable. Trials can come. And that's evidently what happened to Hezekiah, because Sennacherib invaded the land. You know, this day was surely going to come because Hezekiah had not been paying tribute. And along with Hezekiah, many of the other neighboring countries also stopped paying their tribute. So it was only a matter of time before Sennacherib would come and try to force these people to pay their tribute. So you honor God, but even after that, a crisis can come. Last time we were studying about how the Passover and the worship in the temple, it reminds us of heavenly realities. In the book of Ephesians, the first 3 chapters are all focused on heavenly realities. But then afterwards, you have the life in this world. And in chapter 6 of Ephesians, we also read about battle against the evil forces. So all these things go hand in hand in the life of a believer. Okay. Now, this map shows some of the cities of Judah, and the red spots here are the cities where archaeological evidence has been found of the damage or the attacks that the Assyrians did. So Sennacherib attacked many of the cities of Judah, And these red spots are the place where remains of the fighting have been found. Okay, let us read verse 2. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 2.
And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come, and that his purpose was to make war against Jerusalem.
Yeah. So Hezekiah found that he has come, and he needs to think of a response now. It's interesting how different people think of different ways to respond to a crisis. As I said, the neighboring states had also rebelled. Now, if you look at these states, I mean, this is from outside the Bible, but it turns out that Ammon, Moab, Edom, some of the Philistines, they surrendered just at the sight of the Assyrian army. So intimidating was the Assyrian war machine that some of these countries surrendered right away. In the case of Tyre and Sidon, their king and a few of his men, he just escaped. He just escaped, went to some other remote place and started living, and left the land for the Assyrians to conquer and subjugate. And there were some Philistines who asked help from Egypt. They asked help from Egypt. So different people have different ways of responding to a crisis. And today, one of the questions that you and I have to ask ourselves is, when we are faced with an intimidating crisis, how are we going to respond? How is Hezekiah going to respond to this crisis? He decides to stand firm and defend the city. So let's see what Hezekiah did to defend the city. Let's read 2 Chronicles 32, same chapter. Shall we read verse 3 and 4 and then verse 30?
He consulted with his leaders and commanders to stop the water from the springs which were outside the city, and they helped him. Thus many people gathered together, who stopped all the springs and the brook that ran through the land.
Yes.
Saying, why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?
Yeah, verse 30 also.
This same Hezekiah also stopped the water outlet of Upper Gihon and brought the water by tunnel to the west side of the city of David. Hezekiah prospered in all his works.
Yes. So here we see that Hezekiah asks counsel. He was not an autocrat acting according to whims, but he asked counsel, and he had so many officials to advise him. And they thought of something sensible, and that is to take the water that was there outside the city, to divert it and get it inside the city into Jerusalem. They did not want the countryside to be abundant with water when the attacking Assyrians would come. And we can tell ourselves this way, we can take a lesson this way, that when Satan or the world is going to attack us, do not lay anything out in the open. Do not lay anything vulnerable out in the open. For example, Satan does not know our thoughts. He cannot manipulate our mind, but he watches our actions closely. If Satan looks at your actions and sees that you have bitterness for somebody else, or Satan looks and sees that you have a liking for a particular sin, then that is a foothold that Satan has in your life. And Hezekiah and his men did not want to give the Assyrians any foothold. Shall we read verse 5?
And he strengthened himself, built up all the walls that was broken, raised it up to the towers, and built another wall outside. Also, he repaired the Millo in the city of David and made weapons and shields in abundance.
Yeah. This Millo was a fort, and the walls here speak of static defense. They are fixed. And then you have weapons like arrows and stones that would be thrown. You can consider that as a dynamic defense. Now, in the Bible, salvation has been compared to walls. Like, for example, you in Isaiah 26, we are not reading that verse, but in Isaiah 26:1, it says, God has appointed salvation as walls. So the salvation that we have got in the past when we became born again, that is a protection, a hedge of protection that we have against the attacks of the evil one. Here it says Hezekiah also built an outer wall in verse 5. He also built an outer wall. And in our lives, we can also build outer walls. We can build walls to make sure that certain undesirable things don't come inside our life. Okay, so watch what we should watch, what we see, what we hear, what we read, the kind of company that we keep, the places that we go. You have boundaries for all these things, and those are walls of protection from undesirable attacks from outside. Shall we read verses 6 to 8?
Then he set military captains over the people, gathered them together to him in the open square of the city gate, and gave them encouragement, saying, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria, nor before all the multitude that is with him, for there are more with us than with him.
Yeah, in times of crisis, a leader's true colors are exposed. And here Hezekiah proves to be an able leader. So here he has a valid assessment of the situation. He says, with them is the arm of flesh, with us is the Lord our God. So a valid assessment of the situation. He communicated that to his people. He convinced them. He made them understand what is going on. And then it says he also had a plan of action. He appointed captains. He fortified his army. So what does a leader need to do in times of crisis? Assess the situation properly and communicate that assessment to the people, and make sure that the people are on the same page as he is. Okay, and the other thing is to have a plan of action, and this is what Hezekiah did. And so he is a model for us as to a good spiritual leader. Now, during this time, as Hezekiah and his men were fortifying Jerusalem, what was Sennacherib doing? He was going from place to place. This map shows here the different cities that he attacked. Some of them were easy to attack, and some of them were not so easy. Now, one of the strong fortified cities of Judah after Jerusalem was the city called Lachish. And Sennacherib's army came to Lachish. Okay. So this is a modern reconstruction of how the city of Lachish might have been at that point of time. Okay, so although the Bible does not spend much time about Lachish, we have some information here, which I will present in the form of some pictures. So this is how Lachish would have looked at that time. And you can see that the city is very inaccessible. There are steep ravines on all sides. So the Assyrians quickly realized that their best bet is somewhere here. There was a staircase and there was a courtyard, and between the two walls, and they thought that this is the best way to try and enter the city. So they focused their attacks, or they focused their efforts on this part of the city. So the same part which I was pointing to, these are the remains today. So you see the passageway was there. Yeah, the passageway was there here, and then this rectangular area, and then the city. So that's the same thing that we find here. The passageway is there here, and then you have this rectangular area, and in the foreground of this photo is the rest of the city. So these are the remains of the place, and this is the place from where the Assyrians attacked. Now, this is actually a plan of the palace of one of the palaces of Sennacherib in Nineveh. That was his capital in the land of Assyria. And so people excavated this place and they found that there is one room. Now it is called the Lachish room. And in this room, Sennacherib has tried to show and narrate his campaign, focusing on the city of Lachish. So although the Bible mentions Lachish, the Bible does not get into much detail about what happened there. But the Bible tells us that Sennacherib attacked Lachish, but Sennacherib, gave some details there, which are in this Lachish room. So those panels that were there were discovered by archaeologists and then taken all the way to England. So this is the British Museum. So there is a room now in the British Museum, just as there used to be a room in Sennacherib's palace. Now there's a room in the British Museum that is dedicated to the siege at Lachish that Sennacherib and his army were up to. So this is the interior of that room. So in this room in the British Museum, you have all these engravings that Sennacherib made, which show what his army was doing at Lachish. Okay, so you see these are Assyrian soldiers, spearmen with shields. Then on the left, we have the archers. And on the right, we have the sling specialists. So the Assyrians had a highly developed army. You can see all the soldiers are in uniform. All of them are wearing shoes. All of them have their helmets. So the Assyrians put a lot of effort in building up their army and making it very strong. And they considered themselves to be experts in breaking sieges. And so that is what they were trying to do at Lachish as well. So on the left is the remains today of the ramp. The ramp means an inclined plane that the attacking army will make in order to climb up to the wall. So on the panel that is shown on the right, you can see there's a drawing of Assyrian soldiers, and these soldiers are climbing up the ramp, okay, and they're trying to attack the city. This is a close-up of the same image. So this is an equipment that the Assyrian army had, and it is being attacked, and the Israelite defenders are throwing torches of fire, they're throwing stones, and the Assyrian soldiers are trying to take this equipment up. This equipment is a big cart in which there is a heavy beam, and the heavy beam has to be hit hard against the walls of the city, and that is supposed to break the walls of the city. So you can see the fiery torch this is a torch of fire, and that there are stones that the Israelites are throwing at this siege engine. This is a tower on the top of the city walls. So the people who are standing here are Israelite soldiers. And here is an Israelite soldier trying to shoot an arrow. And you have others, Israelite soldiers, trying to throw stones, right? So these were the ways in which the people of Lachish tried to defend themselves against Sennacherib and his army. And now you can see that the Assyrian soldiers are climbing up the ramp, but look at this. The gate of the city has been opened, and you can see people coming out. So this is like the ending stages of the siege. We don't know how long the siege lasted, but as the siege drew to an end, the people were losing hope. So here you have some civilians who are coming out with their luggage. They're trying to escape. And after the siege was broken and Sennacherib's army conquered the city, they burned it, and the ash of that fire is still to be seen. And here we have Israelite soldiers on the left, and in the middle are Assyrian officials, and sitting on the chair here is Sennacherib. Okay, so later on somebody smashed the part which was showing his face, so that's not visible. But this is Sennacherib. The person who is standing next to him is the chief commander, who is called Tartan, and then you have the Assyrian soldiers, and here you have Israelite soldiers who evidently are begging for mercy. Okay, this is a close-up of the same image. Sennacherib is sitting, and the Assyrian soldiers are bringing the prisoners of war to him. And on the left, you can see an Assyrian soldier is killing one of the prisoners of war. So the Assyrians were very cruel to the people whom they captured. May not be very cruel to the civilians, but they were cruel to the officials and the people whom they felt did not submit to them. And here you can see Israelites are carrying their luggage, and they are going on carts. They are going as captives to the land of Assyria. So after Sennacherib captured Lachish, he sent the people in captivity to Assyria. So here you can see some of them are traveling in carts, some of them are traveling in foot. They have tried to carry everything they had. Some people have camels, and they are forced to take everything that they had and travel all the way to Assyria. Okay, so this is about the siege of Lachish. Lachish was one of the strong cities, and you can imagine that after Sennacherib spent so much time attacking the city, finally the city fell. How would Hezekiah and the others at Jerusalem have felt? How would they have felt to see that Lachish has fallen and many people have been killed and taken captive? After Lachish, the next stop is Jerusalem. So it's like, a crisis comes, but then the crisis comes even nearer home. The crisis comes even nearer home. And so it becomes more intimidating. Okay, so let us now read. We'll go down further, and we'll read 2 Kings chapter 18. Come to 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 14. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 14.
Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Turn away from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will pay. And the king of Assyria assessed Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold.
So up till now, Hezekiah has not been paying tribute. But when he sees Lachish fall and all these things that we saw on the slides, he got intimidated. And he told the Assyrian emperor, I'm willing to pay tribute. And I was just thinking about how he changed his decision. He refers to his earlier decision as a mistake. Okay. After all the good things that Hezekiah had done in the early years of his reign, why did God not protect the city of Lachish and the other cities as well? And Lachish was supposed to be very strong. Why did God not protect him? Sometimes we are troubled by the things that God allows in our lives. I didn't think that God would allow this in my life, but God allowed it. I thought it was too bad that God would allow such a thing, so he wouldn't have allowed it. But then it turned out that God allowed such a thing in my life. Now, this can be unnerving. And probably Hezekiah did not realize at that point of time that there was so much of sin in the land that God was using the Assyrians to judge the people of Judah. The people of Lachish and the other cities, they had sinned badly, and they had to be punished for that. We also know that later on, around 100 years later, the whole land of Israel, the whole land of Judah went into captivity. Even Jerusalem fell. That happened later. But perhaps God at this point of time was weakening the land so that later the conquest of the full land would be feasible by the Babylonians. So God was weakening the land now. The people of the land had sinned. God refused to prevent the fall of Lachish. But at the same time, God had a covenant promise with David's dynasty. God had a covenant promise regarding Jerusalem, that place which is known by his name. So Hezekiah could have thought this way, that, okay, God allowed Lachish to fall, but he's not going to allow Jerusalem to fall. Or at least I should consult God before deciding to give tribute to Sennacherib. There is no record that Hezekiah consulted God before giving tribute to Sennacherib. And it's very easy for us to say these things, looking back 2,700 years. Okay, Hezekiah should have done this, he should have done that. According to what I understand from the whole story, he should have refused to pay the tribute. He could have just told the Assyrians that I'm not paying, you come and fight, I will try to fight you back, or I will rely on my God to protect me. That's what he should have said, but then he did not say that. Let's read verse 15 and 16. Same chapter, 15 and 16.
So Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah stripped the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars of which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria.
Yeah. When the king demands this kind of tribute, the convenient thing to do is to take the temple treasures and give it to the king. Right? They did not take their own private money and give it to the Assyrian king. They took the money from the temple and gave it to the Assyrian king. And we ought to ask ourselves this question, that when the world makes big demands on us, what is the time, what are the resources, or what are the funds, or what are the abilities that we sacrifice, or what are the things that we sacrifice? And it is possible that the first thing that we sacrifice is the time that we give to God. My job is becoming more and more busy. So the first thing I start skipping is my time with God. Such things can happen in the life of a Christian. And that's what happened with Hezekiah. If you look at the tabernacle and the temple, the silver reminds us of redemption. Silver was collected from the people as redemption money, and gold in the tabernacle and the temple shows the glory of God. And the world will come to us with its demands. As we have seen before, Assyria is like the picture of the secular world that puts pressure on us. And they come to us with their demands, and they want us to surrender these truths. As Christians, we hold on to the truths of the redemption. We hold on to the truths of God's glory, of God's holy word. Just as the Assyrians were asking, Hezekiah wanted the temple and wanted the treasures in the temple. Today, the world is asking us to surrender various things like this. For example, belief in the authenticity of this very account. If you look at what the world has to say about Kings and Chronicles, they have something else to say. So they are putting pressure on us to admit that these accounts are not factual. As we saw, there's so much of archaeological evidence, so the whole story cannot be denied, but the debate is about the details. And the world wants us to think that the biblical record is not authentic. So that's the kind of pressure that we face. And Hezekiah tried appeasement. He tried appeasement, but it turns out like this, that appeasement and compromise never works. With the world, appeasement and compromise never works. As Christians, if we surrender any of the things, when I say things, I mean biblical things. If we surrender biblical things to the world, they will always demand more. If you stop believing in something that is written in the Bible, whether it is about the creation of the world, whether it is about the liberation of the people of Israel from Egypt, whether it is about what the Bible says about sexuality, what it says about the end of the world, anything is there. If you surrender it, the world will not stop at that. They will ask for more. And that is something that we find find here. Sennacherib took the tribute, but even though he got the tribute, he was not completely happy, because he thought to himself, after I return back to Assyria, will this fellow Hezekiah continue to pay the tribute? He just did not have confidence that Hezekiah will pay the tribute. And so he was not satisfied. Let us read verse 17. 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 17.
Then the king of Assyria sent the Tartan, the Rabbases, and the Rabshakeh from Lachish with a great army against Jerusalem to King Hezekiah. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. When they had come up, they went and stood by the aqueduct from the upper pool, which was on the highway to the fuller's field.
Yes. These three terms here are probably not names, but they are titles. Tartan is the chief commander who was standing next to Sennacherib in that panel that we saw. And Rabshakeh means the chief speaker and the spokesperson for the king. And the other one, Rabsaris, is another officer. They came to an elevated spot outside the city of Jerusalem, from which the walls were not so far apart, and they could see the people on the wall, and they could talk to them. So Hezekiah did not want to risk going out to, there on the walls to meet these people. So he just sent three of his officials, and then they started speaking. Okay. Now, in order to understand what they say, there is something that we need to know in the background. We will not read those verses, but in the book of Isaiah, we won't read those verses right now. But in the book of Isaiah, it says that the kings of Egypt and Ethiopia had sent messengers to Hezekiah, messengers who were encouraging him to rebel against the Assyrian emperor. So they were trying to form an alliance. And Isaiah, the prophet, would always speak in this way: do not look to Egypt for support. So we don't know how much Hezekiah trusted or how much he relied on those Egyptians, but evidently these Assyrians knew about what had taken place. Let's read the same chapter, verses 19 to 21.
Then the Rabshakeh said to them, say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king and the king of Assyria, what confidence is this in which you trust?
20 on screen.
You speak of having plans and power for war, but they are mere words. And in whom do you trust? And that you rebel against me? Now look, you are trusting in the staff of this broken reed, Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it.
Yeah.
So
he knows about this alliance. And here we understand that, we cannot play tricks with the world. Egypt represents the world. Assyria also represents the world. The world has different facets, and they all beckon us. Each side of the world has a different challenge. On the one hand, you have this imposing challenge from the world, the pressure to conform, the pressure to, focus on material things and so on. On the other hand, you have the Egyptian world, that is the glamour world, the world of enjoyment, the world of vanity. So all these things beckon to us, but we cannot oppose the world with the world. When you oppose the world, you can only stand on the authority of the Bible. And probably to Hezekiah's credit, he was not taking those Egyptians seriously. But anyway, these people thought that he was relying on Egypt, and that's why they made this statement. Let's read verse 22.
but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars as Hezekiah has taken away, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem.
Yeah, Hezekiah had destroyed the high places. And as we observed before, sometimes the high places were used to worship the true God, but they were not the God-appointed means. God's appointed place of worship was Jerusalem, and Hezekiah was sticking to that pattern. And these Assyrian officials thought that Hezekiah had gone against Jehovah because he broke down the high places. So here we understand that the world does not understand our faith. If the world comes to our meeting, for example, and they see that, there is no picture of Jesus there, there's no picture of Mary there, there's no priest there, they will say, oh, are you all really Christians? They don't understand our faith. And part of the reason for this misunderstanding is that people who call themselves Christians themselves have tolerated wrong practices or have indulged in wrong practices for the world to see. And the kings of Israel and Judah, most of them, even many of the good kings, tolerated the high places. But Hezekiah was more godly than that, and he did not tolerate the high places. And this Rabshakeh calls Hezekiah a deceiver. And the world will accuse us of deceiving our children. The world will accuse church leaders of deceiving the church people because we preach God's word. And that was the strategy, or that was the practice of the Assyrians. Let's go down to verse 25.
Have I now come up without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it.
Yeah. Sometimes the world will co-opt our faith. They will try to pretend, or they will try to claim that, they are acting in good faith according to God's ways. They will take God's name. I mean, if you have shared the gospel with people, probably you would have come across people saying that, yeah, in our religion also, we believe that Jesus is one of the incarnations of God. We believe that Jesus is also one of the prophets. Really, then where is the honor that you give to him? If you believe that he is an incarnation of God, where is the honor that you give to him? The world will sometimes take the name of Christ, but they don't give him the honor that is due to him. And all these things they will do to confuse us. Sometimes false prophets will claim to speak in the name of God. They will target believers and they will tell things about God. They will speak in God's name, although they don't have any real connect with God. This is the practice of the Assyrians and of the world today. Now, in verse 26, Hezekiah's officials ask Rabshakeh to speak in Aramaic, that's the Assyrian language, rather in Hebrew, because they did not want the people of Judah to hear all the blasphemous, intimidating things that the Assyrians were saying. But then that fellow refused. He said that I'm not going to speak in the Assyrian language. I would like to speak in the Hebrew language. Let all the people of Judah hear and know that this is the situation that they are going to go through. And today, even we don't want our children, we don't feel like allowing our children to be exposed to all the wickedness that is there in the world. But the world wants to target children. The world wants to influence them at a young age, through various means. Lots has been documented about how, smoking ads are targeted at underage people and this and that. So many such things are there. The world tries to target people young, change their mindset. And now Hezekiah's officials were not able to stop the Assyrians from speaking in Hebrew. And sometimes we are not able to insulate our children completely from the messages of the world. You cannot live in an island. Our children are going to go to school. They are going to talk with their friends. They are going to, come across things on TV or in the internet and so on. So we cannot prevent all sorts of bad exposure. But what we would need to do is to ground them solidly in the truth, to answer the questions, to explain things to them properly. And that's what Hezekiah had done earlier. He told his people, With us is God, and with them is the arm of flesh. And before that, Hezekiah had been appointing Levites and priests to teach the people. So Hezekiah had been doing his homework. So the people who heard all these blasphemous things from the Assyrians, they might have been intimidated, but they were not convinced. They were still loyal to Hezekiah. And that's what we want, isn't it? Even after our children go out and see all that there is in the world, we want them to be still loyal to the principles, to the God that we have introduced them to. So Hezekiah was successful in that sense. Let us read from the same chapter, verse 31 and 32. Verse 31 and 32.
Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make peace with me, buy a present and come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one of you from his own fig tree, and every one of you drink the waters of his own system, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive groves and honey, that you may live and not die. But do not listen to Hezekiah, lest he persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us.
Yeah. So here you see the plan of the Assyrians. They wanted to deport the population to Assyria as captives there, and they wanted to appoint somebody else as the king instead of Hezekiah. Maybe a Jewish person who would be loyal to Assyria, or maybe even an Assyrian official can serve as the governor of Jerusalem. So they wanted to do all these things, and they are telling the people that, see, this is the good deal. It's better for you that you come to Assyria. And that is exactly what the world will tell us. The world will tell us that, the deal that we are offering you is a good deal. Become like us. You will get acceptance, you will get recognition, you will get wealth, you will be able to have a good life. And here, if you read the whole speech, you find that these commanders are narrating all the places that the Assyrians have conquered, all the achievements that they have. So the world also will tell us, look at this person, he did not go to church, or he did not, say God all the time. He focused on his work, he focused on his career, he focused on his connections, and see where he is today. See how famous he is. See how rich he is. See how much respected he is in the world. And that's what the world is going to tell us. And these Assyrians also told the people of Judah, don't listen to Hezekiah. And the world will tell our children the same thing. Don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your church leaders. Don't listen to the Bible. We people today, we are experts and we know much more. We are advanced. What your parents have told you about the Bible, that's all outdated, but we have better things to tell you. These are the kind of messages that the world is going to give to our children. And that's what the Assyrians did over here. So you see here, the overall attempt is to brainwash and intimidate the people and to break the trust that they have in their leader. Now, what is the response that these people gave? Let's read verse 36.
But the people held their peace and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was, do not answer him.
Yes. There are times when it is good to speak, but there are also times when it is best to keep silent. I was reminded of David when I thought of the policy that Hezekiah expressed here. Don't answer him anything. When David heard Goliath challenging the people of Israel, David was very vocal in his response, both to his fellow Israelites, and later on when he faced Goliath also, he was very vocal. But here, Hezekiah tells his people to keep quiet. How do we decide when to speak and when not to speak? David was in this situation or frame of mind or experience with God, that he had this assurance that God is going to give them victory over the Philistines. Ever since the time of Samson, God had been slowly getting these people out of the yoke of the Philistines. Samson had his failures, so he did not do a very thorough job of it. But God was slowly getting the people out of the Philistine domination. And David himself had his personal experiences with God. And on the basis of all these things, David could feel confident that, yes, this is the time to speak out, and this is the time to go straight ahead and face the enemy right on. Hezekiah was not able to have the same measure of confidence. His people were just recovering from a long period of sin. They weren't close to God like how David was. And no doubt Hezekiah was a man of God. But Hezekiah himself had given into pressure recently, and he had given tribute to Sennacherib. And he must have thought that after Sennacherib gets the tribute, he will go. But now Sennacherib is not going, and he is again coming here. So Hezekiah evidently felt that I need to seek the face of God. And in fact, that's what he does next. So without speaking to God, without hearing from God, and without understanding exactly what is God's heart concerning this matter, I don't want to respond to the Assyrians. So that is the wise policy that Hezekiah adopted. There are times when it is wise not to answer a fool. It is better to keep silence. So our time is up, so I'll stop at this point, although I intended to cover some further ground. So what we have seen is the crisis that Hezekiah faced after those golden first few years in which everything went well and Hezekiah was able to do a lot of good in the land. The king's narrative says that Sennacherib entered the land in Hezekiah's 14th year. So they had 13 good years when there were no troubles. But this day was coming. They had stopped paying tribute. So it was quite likely that the emperor would come calling, and indeed he did. And as I mentioned, when he came nearby, the mere sight of the army was enough to terrify Moab, Edom, Ammon, many of the other city-states. They all resumed paying tribute. They paid whatever penalties the Assyrian emperor imposed on them. But Hezekiah decided to defend his city. And before the king has to come to Jerusalem, there are other cities that he needs to conquer. Lachish was there. And perhaps it was a shock to Hezekiah that God allowed Lachish to fall. And we saw all the graphic details as to how Lachish fell. And the Bible does not get into that detail, but it just mentions in passing that the king was there at Lachish and he was besieging the place. And the place fell. And when the place fell, Hezekiah sent a message to Sennacherib when he was at Lachish saying that, I'm sorry, I'm willing to pay tribute. And he paid the tribute. But Sennacherib was not satisfied. Despite Hezekiah emptying or taking the treasures from the temple, taking the good and holy things and giving them to the world, appeasement will never work. Sennacherib was not satisfied, and so he sends his commander and his spokesperson to intimidate the people of Judah and ask them to surrender. And the commanders claim that your best deal would be to surrender to us. And that's what the world is telling us. Don't have any Christian testimony. Don't hold on to these beliefs. Don't believe in the Old Testament, including Kings and Chronicles. That's what the world is telling us today. Okay, they want us to compromise on everything. And if you compromise a little, it is not going to make them happy. Don't compromise on the Bible. There are other things where we have freedom, but don't compromise on anything related to the Bible. So the Assyrians came, they railed on the people, they claimed that Hezekiah is a deceiver, they said all the things based on their misunderstanding, but Hezekiah told his people, do not answer them a word. And that's exactly what his people did. So to Hezekiah's credit, he was able to show the qualities of a leader, which made the people at least stay loyal to him, and the people supported him in the course of action that he did. So next time, God willing, we will see what Hezekiah did and the kind of answer that God provided. May God bless these words to our hearts.